Have you ever wondered how children in ancient Greece learned to read and count without modern schools, books, or pencils? Today, you will follow a single day in the life of a young Greek boy named Demos, discovering the rhythms, lessons, and small wonders of learning in a world long ago. From the first rays of the sun to the quiet moments before sleep, every detail will show how knowledge was passed on, shaped by culture, discipline, and simple tools. This is a journey into a day of curiosity, routine, and discovery, where every small action contributes to a lifelong understanding. The morning in Demos's small home began softly, with the golden light of the sun stretching over the terracotta rooftops of Athens. Outside, the city slowly stirred, merchants prepared their stalls, oxen shuffled along dusty roads, and the aroma of fresh bread drifted through the narrow streets. Inside, Demos rose from his straw-filled mattress, careful not to wake his younger siblings who still slept. He moved barefoot across the cool stone floor, feeling the slight chill of early morning. His mother had already prepared a modest breakfast of barley bread and olives, which he ate quietly, savoring the simple taste. After breakfast, Demos gathered his writing tablet and stylus, items treasured in every household where learning mattered. The tablet was a smooth piece of wood coated with a thin layer of wax, and the stylus, carefully shaped from wood, allowed him to carve letters and numbers into the wax with precision. This small ritual of preparation marked the beginning of a structured day. In ancient Greece, formal schooling often took place at home under the guidance of a paid teacher, or pedagogue, who was sometimes a slave or a learned family friend. The focus was on both the mind and the body. Early training in literacy and numeracy went hand in hand with lessons about discipline, respect, and observation. The streets outside were alive with sounds that punctuated his morning studies, the distant clang of a blacksmith, the voices of older children rushing toward the marketplace, and the gentle cooing of pigeons on the roof tiles. Sitting cross-legged on a small mat, Demos began practicing the alphabet. He traced each letter carefully into the wax, repeating their names under his breath. The teacher's instructions were clear and precise, emphasizing repetition. Writing letters correctly was not only an exercise in literacy but also a demonstration of patience and self-control. Mistakes could be easily erased by smoothing the wax, but the effort to achieve perfection was highly valued. After mastering a few lines of letters, Demos shifted to counting exercises. Pebbles, small sticks, or drawn marks in the sand served as early tools for arithmetic. He arranged the pebbles into groups, practicing simple addition and subtraction. Numbers were not abstract concepts to him, they were tangible, manipulable, and closely tied to daily life. Counting helped with understanding trade, measuring land, and preparing food portions. The pedagogue watched attentively, correcting his hand positions, guiding him to maintain proper posture, and ensuring that the child's attention did not wander. As the morning sunlight grew warmer, Demos's lessons expanded beyond the tablet. His teacher took him to a small courtyard, where he could recite poetry and simple texts aloud. Oral repetition was a crucial part of Greek education, reinforcing memory and pronunciation. The sounds of words flowing from his lips became intertwined with gestures, rhythm, and the movement of air, engraving knowledge both in mind and body. Learning was not merely passive absorption, it was an active engagement, a daily rhythm of concentration, action, and reflection. By mid-morning, a short pause allowed Demos to stretch and run lightly in the courtyard. Movement was considered essential to a child's growth, and even during the study day, physical activity was carefully balanced with intellectual training. The sunlight highlighted the warm ochre tones of the stone walls and the simple mosaics beneath his feet, connecting the lessons inside the house with the broader beauty and structure of the world outside. Each pebble counted, each letter traced, and each verse repeated became a part of a larger understanding of order, discipline, and culture, a foundation for a life of learning in the Greek world. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, the day in Demos's household settled into a steady rhythm. The courtyard, bathed in bright light, became both classroom and playground. The pedagogue moved aside a small earthen jar, revealing a patch of sand carefully smoothed for lessons. Here, Demos traced letters, numbers, and simple words with a stick, the grains yielding under his movements and holding the forms until he corrected them. Repetition remained key, for mastery required not only seeing and hearing the letters but physically shaping them, imprinting knowledge in both mind and body. Soon, arithmetic exercises expanded. The pebbles grew into small arrays, teaching Demos about multiplication through grouping, and division through careful separation. These exercises were not abstract, they mirrored real life. Counting coins, distributing olives, or dividing portions of barley became mental maps of the numbers he practiced. The pedagogue occasionally called attention to patterns, showing how adding small numbers repeatedly produced larger totals, connecting the tangible with abstract reasoning. For Demos, the sand and pebbles were more than tools, they were bridges between imagination and understanding, grounding his learning in sensory experience. By late morning, lessons shifted indoors briefly. Demos sat on a low wooden stool, the wax tablet balanced on his knees. Poetry and short moral tales were read aloud to him, their meanings discussed through simple gestures and explanations. Greek children often learned these stories not only for literacy but for moral education. Courage, humility, and respect were woven into every line. Demos traced the words on his tablet, sounding out letters and syllables, pausing to repeat difficult combinations. Memory exercises were rigorous, for oral recitation ensured that knowledge was not fleeting. Every correctly remembered line was rewarded with a nod, a rare piece of praise that reinforced diligence and focus. The midday meal marked a brief pause in formal study. Demos and his family ate a modest meal of bread, fresh figs, and goat cheese. Conversations were minimal but instructive, as older siblings or his parents asked about lessons, subtly testing comprehension and reinforcing what had been learned. Even in these quiet moments, observation and reflection were encouraged. Demos watched how his mother measured grains or how his father arranged herbs, mentally linking these acts with the numerical concepts practiced earlier. In ancient Greece, learning did not end at the tablet, it permeated everyday life, merging household chores, commerce, and cultural values into a seamless educational experience. After eating, Demos returned to the courtyard, where lessons intensified. Writing and arithmetic now intertwined with geometry, a subject that fascinated the young boy. Lines, triangles, and simple shapes were drawn in the sand, measured with small wooden rulers, and compared for size and symmetry. Geometry was not merely mathematical, it was an introduction to logic, proportion, and aesthetic judgment. The pedagogue emphasized precision and patience, reminding Demos that a straight line was not just a mark but a reflection of careful observation and deliberate effort. In these exercises, the physical and mental were inseparable, the hand guided the mind, and the mind refined the hand. By mid-afternoon, a gentle fatigue settled over the household. Demos paused to watch shadows stretch across the stone floor, noticing how the sun's movement mirrored the passage of time. Even in moments of rest, learning persisted, the child's mind catalogued patterns, distances, and relationships. Every pebble counted, every letter traced, and every line drawn in the sand contributed to an understanding of order and harmony. This combination of rigorous practice, physical activity, and reflective observation defined the rhythm of an educational day. As the day progressed, Demos's lessons began to merge. He arranged pebbles to form words, connecting literacy with arithmetic, while tracing letters in geometric patterns to practice both form and function. The pedagogue's patient guidance ensured that errors were corrected gently but consistently, embedding a sense of discipline alongside knowledge. The afternoon sunlight highlighted the warm colors of the courtyard, reflecting off the polished wooden tablet and the small ceramic vessels scattered nearby. In this serene, sunlit space, the boy's mind and body worked together, learning not through pressure or force, but through careful attention, repetition, and the simple joys of discovery. As the afternoon light softened, casting long shadows across the courtyard, Demos's day continued with a gentler rhythm. The pedagogue guided him through exercises that required both patience and attention to detail. Letters traced in the wax tablet now formed simple sentences, allowing the boy to practice reading comprehension. Each sentence described familiar objects, actions, or scenes from daily life: the olive tree outside, the bread baking in the hearth, the merchants arranging their goods. By connecting words to tangible experiences, the abstract nature of language became a concrete part of his world. Demos repeated the sentences aloud, listening to the cadence of the words, the rise and fall of syllables, and the clarity of consonants and vowels. The arithmetic lessons evolved alongside reading. Pebbles were grouped and regrouped, now forming small problems that required careful calculation. Counting became paired with measurement. Demos measured lengths of string, portions of grain, and even the angles of simple wooden shapes. Multiplication, division, and simple fractions were taught as tools for real-life tasks, sharing bread among siblings, dividing coins earned for chores, or calculating the space needed for planting seeds in the small garden. Numbers were no longer abstract symbols, they had a purpose, a meaning rooted in the rhythms of daily life. During these late afternoon lessons, the pedagogue emphasized observation and memory. Demos practiced recalling sequences of letters, numbers, and shapes, linking them to stories or objects he had seen earlier. Oral recitation remained central, with the boy repeating lines until they were etched into memory. Even when mistakes occurred, they were treated as opportunities to refine attention and precision. The slow, deliberate process instilled both patience and self-discipline. Knowledge was a mosaic built from countless small, careful pieces, and each day added another fragment. A quiet moment arrived as Demos paused to rest, sitting on the stone floor of the courtyard, feeling the warmth of the sun fading from the tiles. He watched the world around him, a neighbor leading a donkey laden with water jars, the wind stirring olive branches, the distant sound of waves from the harbor. Even in stillness, learning persisted. His eyes traced shapes, calculated distances, and connected sounds with their sources. Observation, a subtle but essential part of Greek education, trained the mind to notice patterns and relationships in the natural and human-made world. As evening approached, the lessons shifted again. Demos practiced writing his name and the names of family members in the wax tablet, connecting literacy to personal identity. Small stories were traced in the sand, and simple fables were retold from memory, blending narrative skills with moral lessons. These exercises emphasized the importance of culture, history, and ethics in Greek education. Reading and counting were never isolated skills, they were intertwined with poetry, philosophy, and civic understanding. Through repetition, practice, and observation, Demos absorbed not only knowledge but also the values of his society. The day wound down with a light physical activity. Demos ran briefly in the courtyard, balancing along low walls, stretching arms and legs, and feeling the energy of the day flow through him. In Greek education, physical training complemented intellectual development, promoting balance, strength, and endurance. Even in these simple movements, the boy learned focus, coordination, and self-control. As dusk settled, the household prepared for the evening meal. The soft glow of oil lamps illuminated the simple interior, and the smells of cooking filled the air. Demos's mind reflected on the day, letters traced, pebbles counted, shapes measured, and stories remembered. Knowledge was cumulative, built through repetition, observation, and careful attention. The pedagogue, satisfied with the boy's progress, allowed him a moment of quiet before night fell, understanding that reflection and rest were as crucial to learning as any lesson taught. By the time darkness enveloped the city, Demos lay on his straw mattress, the sounds of the evening surrounding him, distant conversations, the soft flap of pigeons' wings, and the rhythmic hum of life continuing beyond the walls of his home. Sleep approached gently, carrying with it the impressions of the day, the patterns, numbers, words, and moral tales woven together. Even in dreams, the lessons would continue, building the foundation for future knowledge, curiosity, and understanding in a world that valued learning as an essential part of life. Night had settled over the city, yet the household remained quiet but alive with subtle activity. Demos's lessons were not yet fully over, for in ancient Greece, learning was considered a continuous, almost immersive experience. The pedagogue encouraged reflection before sleep, a time when the day's knowledge could settle in the mind. Demos sat on the edge of his straw mattress, wax tablet in hand, reviewing letters and numbers once more. He carefully traced the alphabet, recalling each line and curve from memory, linking them with the words and phrases he had practiced earlier. The tactile sensation of the stylus against wax reinforced understanding, and the soft glow of an oil lamp highlighted the careful marks he made. The pedagogue introduced short mental exercises without tools, a common practice to strengthen memory and reasoning. Demos pictured pebbles in his mind, mentally grouping and separating them to solve arithmetic problems. He imagined the geometric shapes from the courtyard, visualizing their angles and proportions. This form of mental rehearsal trained the mind to manipulate abstract concepts without the need for physical objects, a skill highly valued in Greek education. Such exercises cultivated focus, discipline, and imagination, preparing the boy for more advanced learning in the future. At the same time, storytelling became a gentle method of reinforcing literacy and moral lessons. The pedagogue narrated brief fables and myths, not for entertainment alone, but to embed cultural understanding. Demos listened attentively, forming images of heroes, gods, and ordinary citizens in his mind. He connected these narratives with the words on his tablet, practicing recognition, spelling, and comprehension simultaneously. Each story carried subtle lessons about courage, wisdom, and humility, illustrating that education was not only a matter of skill but of character formation. The physical environment played a crucial role in this late-evening study. The soft flicker of the lamp cast shadows that seemed to dance along the walls, creating a calm, almost meditative atmosphere. Demos' senses absorbed the quiet details, the faint scent of olive oil from the lamp, the distant murmur of the marketplace settling for the night, and the cool air brushing against his skin. These subtle sensory impressions intertwined with the lessons of the day, grounding abstract knowledge in lived experience. Every sound, sight, and texture became a thread in the fabric of learning. Even simple household tasks were transformed into opportunities for practice. Demos organized small objects, counted grains, and compared the shapes of tools and containers, all while quietly narrating each action to himself. The pedagogue encouraged him to connect these activities to earlier lessons, reinforcing that knowledge extended beyond formal study. Literacy, numeracy, and observation were not confined to the tablet or the sand, they were part of everyday life. The child's world became a living classroom, where the smallest details carried meaning and every action could teach something new. As the night deepened, Demos' fatigue grew, yet the rhythm of learning persisted in subtle ways. He recited letters and numbers in a soft whisper, repeated simple sentences from memory, and imagined solutions to small problems. The pedagogue emphasized that rest was also a form of learning, for the mind consolidated experience during sleep. This understanding shaped the gentle conclusion of the day's studies. Demos put away his stylus, smoothed the wax tablet, and settled beneath a thin blanket. Before closing his eyes, he allowed himself a final reflection on the day, the precision of letters, the balance of numbers, the harmony of shapes, and the moral lessons hidden within stories. Each fragment of knowledge, repeated and reinforced, became a foundation for future learning. The day had been long and filled with challenges, yet it was also rich in discovery, discipline, and quiet satisfaction. As Demos drifted into sleep, the lessons and observations of the day lingered in his mind, blending with dreams and slowly shaping the boy's understanding of the world. The following morning began with a soft golden light spilling over the rooftops, reminding Demos that a new day of learning awaited. Even before breakfast, he rose quietly, mindful of the household's calm. The cool stone floor beneath his feet and the gentle hum of the city waking outside set a rhythm that he had grown accustomed to. Ancient Greek children often started their day with personal preparation and reflection, a brief moment to center themselves before the structured lessons began. Demos traced a line of letters on the wax tablet while the aroma of freshly baked barley bread filled the small kitchen. After breakfast, the pedagogue introduced Demos to lessons that merged literacy, numeracy, and observation of the natural world. A basket of small items, shells, seeds, and smooth stones, served as tools for counting and classification. Demos arranged them in groups, learning to compare size, shape, and quantity. This method, grounded in physical interaction, made abstract concepts tangible. The pedagogue emphasized patterns, how certain seeds appeared more frequently, how shells varied in size, and how grouping could simplify complex calculations. In this hands-on approach, mathematics was not confined to symbols on a tablet but was alive in the world around him. Next came exercises that combined geometry with the surrounding environment. Demos measured shadows cast by olive trees and small columns in the courtyard, learning to estimate angles and lengths. Geometry was taught not only for precision but to instill an awareness of proportion, balance, and harmony, values central to Greek thought. The boy traced shapes in the sand, then compared them to natural objects, noticing symmetry and variation. This practice nurtured observation, analytical thinking, and a subtle appreciation for aesthetics. Every movement of the hand, every measured distance, and every drawn shape reinforced connections between mind and reality. Mid-morning lessons emphasized literacy through cultural stories and moral examples. The pedagogue selected short narratives about heroes, gods, and ordinary citizens, each illustrating virtues such as courage, wisdom, and respect. Demos traced the words in wax, reciting them aloud and forming mental images of the scenes. Memory exercises followed, asking him to recount sequences or identify moral lessons hidden in the tales. The act of retelling strengthened comprehension, verbal articulation, and retention. For Demos, the stories were not mere entertainment, they were a bridge to understanding society, ethics, and the human experience. Arithmetic exercises became increasingly sophisticated as pebbles were replaced by lines and marks drawn in the sand. Simple addition and subtraction gave way to multiplication, division, and even early fractions. Each calculation was contextualized in daily life, dividing portions of food, measuring ingredients for bread, or assessing small trade exchanges in the marketplace. Demos learned to visualize problems, manipulate symbols, and check answers systematically. The pedagogue guided him gently, correcting mistakes while encouraging independent reasoning. Numbers were no longer abstract, they were tools for comprehension, planning, and decision-making. Physical activity punctuated the lessons, as movement was considered vital for balanced development. Demos ran along the courtyard, stretched, and occasionally balanced along narrow ledges, combining play with exercises that strengthened coordination and focus. The sunlight highlighted the warm tones of the stone and sand, and the cool morning breeze provided a subtle reminder of the natural world beyond the walls of the home. Every sound, shadow, and texture became part of the learning experience, connecting intellectual exercises with sensory perception. By late morning, Demos returned to the wax tablet, practicing letters and words more fluidly, integrating them with arithmetic symbols. This combination of disciplines reinforced the principle that learning was holistic, a seamless blend of literacy, numeracy, observation, and reflection. The pedagogue emphasized patience, consistency, and attention to detail, shaping not only the boy's knowledge but also his character. The morning passed in this rhythm of careful practice, observation, and reflection, laying a foundation for the rest of the day's continuing lessons. By midday, the courtyard was bright with sunlight, and the air carried the faint sense of baked bread, olive oil, and herbs. Demos paused briefly to eat a simple meal of bread, figs, and cheese, mindful of both nourishment and the structured rhythm of his learning. Even during meals, lessons continued subtly. The pedagogue encouraged Demos to count slices of bread, divide portions fairly among family members, and notice the patterns in the shapes of figs and cheese pieces. This seamless integration of daily life and learning exemplified the Greek approach. Education extended beyond formal lessons, blending observation, practice, and reflection into every moment. After the meal, the boy returned to the courtyard for exercises combining literacy, numeracy, and social observation. The pedagogue set out small clay tokens, each marked with symbols representing coins, measures of grain, or letters. Demos arranged them to simulate small exchanges or simple calculations, learning to think practically about numbers and their applications. Through these exercises, he grasped not only arithmetic but also principles of fairness, proportion, and practical reasoning. Numbers became part of a living system, tied to trade, household management, and the organization of daily life. Observation remained central to these lessons. Demos studied shadows, the flow of sunlight across walls, and the proportions of objects in the courtyard, connecting geometry to reality. He measured lengths with a string, traced shapes in the sand, and compared angles using his hand as a guide. Each task reinforced both precision and patience, teaching him to notice the relationships between objects and to translate those observations into structured understanding. These exercises nurtured critical thinking, spatial awareness, and a subtle appreciation for harmony and proportion, values deeply embedded in Greek education. Literacy lessons continued alongside these practical exercises. Demos practiced tracing words related to household items, trade, and common actions, linking reading and writing to familiar contexts. Short stories and moral tales were read aloud, with the pedagogue guiding attention to meaning, sequence, and moral significance. Repetition remained essential. The boy recited letters, words, and short passages aloud, committing them to memory. Oral repetition reinforced comprehension and fluency, ensuring that literacy was more than mechanical tracing. It became a living, communicative skill, integrated with observation and understanding. Arithmetic challenges evolved further. Pebbles, clay tokens, and marks in the sand formed problems requiring multiple steps, combining addition, subtraction, and early multiplication. Demos visualized solutions, manipulated the objects physically, and checked his results carefully. These exercises trained both the mind and the hand, promoting precision, attention to detail, and logical reasoning. The pedagogue encouraged independent thought, allowing demos to explore alternative solutions while reinforcing the discipline necessary for accuracy. Movement punctuated the afternoon, as physical activity remained a crucial complement to intellectual effort. Demos ran, stretched, and practiced balancing, connecting coordination with concentration. These moments of physical engagement refreshed the mind, reinforcing the connection between body and intellect. Even during play, subtle lessons continued, counting steps, noting patterns in movement, and maintaining focus cultivated the same attentiveness demanded in writing and arithmetic. By mid-afternoon, the day's exercises began to integrate multiple disciplines. Demos traced letters and numbers together, combined geometric shapes with counting, and linked stories with practical problems. Knowledge was cumulative, layered, and connected, reflecting the holistic philosophy of Greek education. Observation, repetition, and reflection intertwined seamlessly, creating a rhythm that guided the boy through the day. Each action, from tracing letters to arranging pebbles, from measuring shadows to recounting stories, contributed to an understanding that learning was not segmented but part of life itself. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, the courtyard took on a softer glow, casting long shadows across the stone floor. The heat of midday faded, replaced by the gentle coolness of evening. Demos resumed his lessons, this time focusing on repetition and reinforcement of everything learned earlier. The pedagogue guided him through exercises that combined letters, numbers, and shapes in increasingly complex arrangements. Words traced in wax now formed short sentences describing daily life, and numbers were organized into practical problems involving measurement and trade. Each repetition strengthened memory and understanding, turning practice into habit. Storytelling became the primary tool for consolidating literacy. The pedagogue narrated brief myths and fables, and Demos traced key words on his tablet while following the narrative in his mind. Heroes and gods acted out virtues of courage, wisdom, and justice, while ordinary citizens illustrated everyday moral choices. These stories were repeated several times, sometimes rearranged or retold in slightly different forms, challenging Demos to recognize familiar patterns and anticipate outcomes. Oral repetition reinforced memory, while tracing reinforced motor skills, and the integration of moral lessons nurtured character. Arithmetic exercises now merged with real-life scenarios. Demos arranged clay tokens representing coins and measures of grain, solving problems of exchange, proportion, and division. He imagined a small marketplace, calculating totals and sharing resources fairly. These exercises connected numbers with everyday experience, turning abstract symbols into practical tools. The pedagogue emphasized careful observation and logical reasoning, teaching demos that errors were part of learning and that patience and reflection were as important as correct answers. Physical activity punctuated the late afternoon once more. Demos practiced running, stretching, and balancing along the low walls of the courtyard. Coordination exercises were designed to complement mental effort, refreshing the mind and fostering concentration. The gentle rhythm of movement helped consolidate knowledge, as the boys shifted seamlessly between physical and intellectual tasks. In Greek education, this balance of mind and body was considered essential for holistic development, preparing children for the demands of both personal and civic life. As evening settled, lessons shifted toward reflection and integration. Demos reviewed letters, numbers, and geometric shapes together, noticing connections and patterns. He recalled stories and fables, linking moral lessons to everyday situations. Small tasks around the household, arranging tools, counting grains, observing shadows, became informal exercises in observation and reasoning. Even the fading light served as a tool, showing how shadows lengthened and how shapes changed, teaching awareness of time, proportion, and cause and effect relationships. By the time darkness approached, the boy's attention had been engaged in cycles of repetition, observation, and reflection. The pedagogue guided him to a calm, quiet state, encouraging demos to recall the day's lessons silently, to mentally rehearse numbers, letters, and stories. This period of introspection reinforced memory, understanding, and self-discipline. Knowledge was consolidated not through pressure, but through gentle, continuous practice. Finally, demos prepared for sleep. The wax tablet was smoothed, the stylus set aside, and he settled onto his straw mattress. The soft light of a single oil lamp flickered across the walls as he reflected on the day. Letters, numbers, shapes, and stories mingled with the images of the courtyard, the marketplace, and the household. The rhythm of observation, repetition, and reflection, present from morning to evening, had woven a tapestry of understanding. As demos drifted into sleep, the lessons absorbed throughout the day lingered in his mind, quietly shaping the boy's comprehension, imagination, and character, carrying him gently into the world of dreams. The next morning began with familiar quiet, the soft light of dawn brushing across the terracotta rooftops, and the distant murmur of the city stirring awake. Demos rose from his straw mattress, feeling the cool stone beneath his feet. Even before breakfast, the boy carried with him a sense of purpose, knowing that each day offered new opportunities to learn, observe, and practice. The pedagogue encouraged this early mindfulness, guiding demos to begin the day with reflection on the previous lessons. Letters, numbers, shapes, and stories lingered in his memory, ready to be recalled and refined. Breakfast was simple: barley bread, figs, and a small portion of goat cheese. As demos ate, he noticed the patterns in the arrangement of bread pieces, the number of seeds in the figs, and the texture of the cheese. These small observations became natural exercises in counting, classification, and sensory awareness. Even ordinary household activities were treated as moments of subtle learning, demonstrating the Greek belief that education was inseparable from daily life. Each sense, sight, touch, taste, played a role in reinforcing knowledge and attention. After breakfast, the pedagogue introduced a more tactile form of learning. Demos gathered small objects from the household and courtyard, pebbles of varying sizes, seeds, and fragments of pottery. These objects became tools for counting, sorting, and pattern recognition. He grouped pebbles by size, counted seeds repeatedly, and arranged pottery fragments into sequences based on shape and texture. Through these activities, abstract concepts such as numbers, proportions, and categorization were grounded in tangible experience. Demos learned to see relationships, notice differences, and understand order, skills essential for both daily life and intellectual development. Geometry exercises followed, now extended into the natural environment. Demos observed the angles of sunlight as it struck the olive trees and the shadows cast by columns in the courtyard. Using a simple piece of string, he measured distances and traced shapes in the sand, comparing proportions and symmetry. These exercises emphasized observation, precision, and logical reasoning. The pedagogue highlighted how patterns in nature mirrored geometric principles, connecting abstract ideas with tangible experience. In this way, mathematics was not just a set of rules, it became a lens through which to perceive and understand the world. Mid-morning brought the continuation of literacy exercises. Demos practiced tracing letters and forming words on his wax tablet, gradually moving toward short sentences describing scenes from his daily life. The pedagogue narrated brief stories or moral lessons, and Demos repeated them aloud, then traced key words in the wax. Memory, articulation, and comprehension were reinforced simultaneously. Each repetition strengthened neural connections, embedding knowledge deeply and naturally. Literacy was more than reading or writing, it was a living skill that connected language with observation, action, and understanding. Arithmetic exercises became increasingly integrated with the surrounding environment. Demos imagined transactions in a small marketplace, calculating totals and change using pebbles and clay tokens. He estimated quantities of grain, divided portions of bread, and compared the sizes of seeds or pebbles. These activities connected abstract numerical concepts with practical applications, reinforcing the principle that learning was functional as well as intellectual. The pedagogue guided him gently, allowing the boy to reason independently while providing correction and guidance when needed. By late morning, the rhythm of the day had settled into a continuous flow. Demos alternated between writing, counting, measuring, and observing. Physical movement punctuated intellectual work. He ran lightly in the courtyard, balanced along low walls, and stretched, connecting body and mind. Observation and reflection remained central. He noticed how the wind shifted olive branches, how sunlight altered shadows, and how everyday objects followed patterns of size and proportion. These subtle observations deepened his understanding of geometry, measurement, and natural order. As the sun reached its zenith, Demos paused briefly for quiet reflection. The pedagogue encouraged him to mentally review letters, numbers, shapes, and stories, consolidating knowledge through introspection. Each concept, once traced in wax, counted with pebbles, or observed in nature, was now integrated into a broader understanding. The boy's mind worked continuously, connecting patterns, forming relationships, and reinforcing memory. Learning in ancient Greece was thus a holistic, immersive experience, seamlessly blending the intellectual, physical, and moral dimensions of life. As the day advanced, the courtyard grew warmer, and the sounds of the city, voices from the marketplace, the distant clatter of carts, and the chirping of birds, mingled with the rhythm of Demos's lessons. The pedagogue now introduced exercises that combined multiple skills simultaneously. Demos traced sentences on his wax tablet while counting small clay tokens, connecting literacy with numeracy. Words described familiar tasks, measuring grain, dividing bread, or arranging tools, reinforcing the practical applications of letters and numbers. Each repetition strengthened memory, coordination, and understanding, embedding lessons in both mind and hand. Arithmetic exercises became increasingly complex. Demos used pebbles and marks in the sand to solve multi-step problems, combining addition, subtraction, and early multiplication. The pedagogue encouraged him to visualize each step before manipulating the objects, fostering mental calculation alongside physical practice. Fractions and proportions were introduced through simple divisions of food and objects, connecting abstract concepts to real-life situations. Demos learned not only to calculate correctly but also to anticipate outcomes and recognize patterns, laying the groundwork for logical reasoning and problem-solving. Geometry and spatial reasoning exercises continued outdoors. Demos traced shapes in the sand, measured angles using strings and sticks, and compared proportions of natural objects like olive branches and stones. Observation was key. He noted how sunlight changed shadows, how distances appeared from different perspectives, and how symmetry and asymmetry manifested in both human-made and natural forms. These exercises cultivated attention to detail, analytical thinking, and an appreciation for order and balance, essential qualities in Greek education. Midday brought a pause for reflection. Demos sat quietly in the shade, reviewing letters, numbers, and shapes mentally. He recalled stories heard earlier, linking moral lessons to practical situations, honesty in dividing food, fairness in counting coins, and respect in observing family duties. This introspection strengthened comprehension, reinforced ethical understanding, and integrated learning across subjects. In ancient Greece, education was not merely the accumulation of facts but the cultivation of character and judgment, and these moments of quiet reflection were central to that goal. Physical activity continued to punctuate intellectual work. Demos ran lightly, balanced along low walls, and practiced controlled movements, linking physical coordination with mental focus. Even during these exercises, subtle lessons persisted: counting steps, measuring distances, observing patterns in shadows, and practicing precision in movement mirrored the careful attention required in reading, writing, and arithmetic. The pedagogue emphasized the unity of body and mind, teaching that mastery required both physical and intellectual discipline. Literacy exercises evolved to incorporate storytelling and memory work. Demos traced words on the wax tablet while recalling sequences of fables and moral tales. Heroes and ordinary citizens demonstrated virtues such as courage, wisdom, and humility, while the boy identified moral lessons within each story. Repetition, tracing, and oral recitation reinforced memory, comprehension, and articulation, ensuring that literacy was deeply embedded. Each story connected language to culture, observation, and ethical reflection, showing that learning extended beyond technical skills to understanding the human experience. As the sun reached its highest point, the pedagogue encouraged Demos to integrate all learned skills. He arranged pebbles to form simple sentences, measured shapes, counted items, and observed natural patterns simultaneously. This holistic approach demanded attention, coordination, and thoughtful reasoning. Letters, numbers, shapes, and stories merged seamlessly, reflecting the integrated philosophy of Greek education. Knowledge was cumulative and interwoven, connecting practical tasks, intellectual exercises, and moral reflection into a continuous flow. By late afternoon, Demos paused for a brief meal, noting once again the patterns, proportions, and quantities of the food before him. Even these small, routine acts became exercises in observation, numeracy, and reflection. The boy's mind connected the tactile, visual, and intellectual experiences of the day, reinforcing lessons while cultivating patience, awareness, and understanding. Learning was not confined to formal instruction, it permeated every action, observation, and thought, forming a foundation for both skill and character. The late afternoon settled softly over the courtyard, and the city's sounds became gentler: distant footsteps, the murmur of neighbors, and the occasional bray of a donkey. Demos, refreshed after a brief meal and pause, returned to his studies with renewed focus. The pedagogue guided him through exercises that reinforced all he had learned during the day. Letters, words, numbers, and shapes were combined in increasingly intricate tasks. Demos traced sentences in wax, then arranged pebbles to represent the meaning of those words, connecting language, counting, and practical logic in a single coordinated effort. Arithmetic exercises now included more abstract applications. Demos imagined scenarios of trade, measurement, and distribution. Clay tokens represented coins or measures of grain, and he calculated totals, divided portions, and checked results systematically. These exercises trained not only calculation skills but also attention, foresight, and the ability to recognize patterns. Numbers were no longer isolated concepts, they became tools for reasoning, problem-solving, and understanding everyday life. The pedagogue carefully monitored his progress, offering gentle corrections and subtle guidance while allowing Demos to experiment independently. Geometry and measurement continued alongside arithmetic. Demos observed natural patterns, the length of shadows, angles of sunlight, symmetry in leaves, and replicated these observations with strings and sticks. Shapes drawn in sand or traced on small tablets were compared and analyzed. The pedagogue emphasized the relationships between forms, teaching the boy to see order, proportion, and balance in the world around him. This method reinforced spatial reasoning, logic, and aesthetic understanding, showing that mathematics was inseparable from observation and appreciation of nature. Literacy exercises focused on repetition and comprehension. Demos recited stories aloud, traced words on wax, and then recalled sequences from memory. Fables, myths, and brief moral tales were chosen not only for their narrative content but also for the lessons embedded within: honesty, courage, respect, and diligence. Repetition and tracing reinforced memory, while reflection on meaning cultivated ethical understanding. For Demos, literacy was a living skill, deeply connected to observation, reasoning, and moral awareness. Physical activity punctuated the late afternoon, maintaining the balance between mind and body. Demos ran lightly across the courtyard, stretched, and balanced along low walls, linking concentration with coordination. Counting steps, measuring distances, and observing movement patterns integrated numeracy and observation into physical exercises. In Greek pedagogy, such interplay between physical and intellectual training strengthened both mind and body, preparing children for practical and civic life. Observation continued as a subtle, constant practice. Demos noticed the changing light, the movement of clouds, the flutter of leaves, and even the sounds echoing through narrow streets. Each observation was a lesson. Patterns in nature mirrored numerical or geometric principles, and daily routines offered opportunities for counting, measurement, and moral reflection. The pedagogue encouraged attentiveness, showing that learning was not confined to formal exercises but present in every moment of awareness. By early evening, the day's lessons entered a phase of consolidation. Demos reviewed letters, numbers, and geometric shapes together, linking them with the stories and observations of the day. Repetition and reflection reinforced memory, and the boy internalized the connections between abstract concepts and practical experience. Each activity, tracing, counting, measuring, observing, was now part of a continuous, integrated process. The pedagogue's guidance ensured that learning was structured yet fluid, disciplined yet attentive to curiosity and engagement. As the sun dipped lower, casting long, warm shadows across the courtyard, Demos prepared to transition from formal study to quiet reflection. The wax tablet was smoothed, pebbles and tokens were gathered, and the courtyard settled into calm. The day had been filled with cycles of attention, repetition, observation, and movement, building a foundation of literacy, numeracy, geometry, and moral understanding. Demos paused for a moment, taking in the subtle beauty of the evening, aware that each action, each observation, and each repetition had contributed to his growing knowledge and character. Evening descended softly over the city, and the courtyard was bathed in warm, muted light. The heat of the day had waned, leaving behind a calm, almost meditative atmosphere. Demos resumed his studies for the final structured lessons, focusing on consolidation and reflection. Letters, numbers, and shapes were reviewed, traced, and mentally rehearsed. Short sentences describing everyday activities and simple moral tales were traced in wax and recited aloud, reinforcing both literacy and ethical understanding. The pedagogue guided him carefully, ensuring that each repetition strengthened comprehension and memory. Arithmetic exercises in the evening were gentle yet purposeful. Demos used clay tokens and pebbles to solve problems involving addition, subtraction, and simple multiplication. These exercises were contextualized with real-life scenarios, dividing portions of food, distributing tokens as if representing coins, and arranging items according to size or quantity. The pedagogue emphasized careful observation, reasoning, and attention to detail. Mistakes were corrected patiently, encouraging the boy to reflect on his thought process rather than simply memorize answers. Numbers became a language through which Demos understood order, fairness, and proportion in both learning and life. Geometry lessons continued in parallel, but with a subtle, contemplative tone. Demos observed the lengthening shadows of the evening sun and measured angles with simple strings and sticks. He traced shapes in the sand, noting symmetry, balance, and proportion in both natural and human-made objects. Observation was integral. The boy compared shadows, stones, and architectural features, understanding how abstract concepts applied to the world around him. Precision, patience, and careful attention to detail were cultivated alongside intellectual comprehension, reinforcing the Greek ideal that mind and body, observation and reasoning, were inseparable in education. Storytelling formed a central part of the evening lessons. The pedagogue narrated short fables, myths, and moral anecdotes, each illustrating virtues such as courage, honesty, and respect. Demos traced key words on his wax tablet while listening, mentally visualizing the events, and reflecting on the ethical lessons embedded in each narrative. Repetition reinforced memory, while reflection cultivated moral judgment and comprehension. These exercises illustrated that learning was not only about technical skill but also about shaping character, understanding human behavior, and appreciating cultural heritage. Physical activity remained part of the routine, though in a calm, measured form. Demos practiced stretching, slow balance exercises, and light movement across the courtyard. Even in the waning light, he counted steps, measured distances, and observed patterns in his surroundings. These exercises linked mind and body, reinforcing coordination, concentration, and spatial awareness. In Greek pedagogy, such integration of physical and intellectual exercises strengthened both focus and endurance, ensuring that the child developed holistically. Observation was emphasized as a continuous practice. Demos noticed the subtle changes in light, the flutter of leaves, and the distant sounds of evening life. Each observation was a lesson in awareness, teaching him to connect patterns in nature to numerical, geometric, and linguistic principles. The pedagogue guided him to reflect on these observations, linking them to earlier exercises and stories. Through this integration, the boy learned to see the world as a living classroom, where every action, sound, and shadow carried meaning and opportunity for learning. As night approached, Demos transitioned to quiet reflection. The wax tablet was smoothed, pebbles and tokens gathered, and the courtyard became still. The pedagogue encouraged mental rehearsal, letters were traced in memory, numbers calculated silently, and stories recalled with attention to sequence and moral significance. This period of introspection reinforced memory, comprehension, and reasoning, consolidating the lessons of the day. Learning was not confined to formal activity, it continued in moments of quiet thought, blending repetition, observation, and reflection. Finally, Demos prepared for sleep. The oil lamp flickered softly, casting gentle shadows across the walls. He lay on his straw mattress, reflecting on the day's experiences, letters traced, pebbles counted, shapes measured, and stories remembered. The rhythm of learning, from morning exercises to afternoon challenges and evening reflection, had created a continuous cycle of practice, observation, and moral development. As Demos drifted into sleep, the lessons of the day lingered in his mind, quietly shaping his understanding, imagination, and character, carrying him into dreams rich with letters, numbers, shapes, and stories, preparing him for another day of discovery. The night deepened, and the courtyard had fallen into a hushed calm. The soft glow of the oil lamp illuminated Demos's wax tablet as he prepared for the final exercises of the day. These were quiet, reflective tasks designed to consolidate everything he had learned: letters, words, numbers, geometric shapes, and moral lessons. The pedagogue guided him gently, emphasizing that the mind could absorb knowledge even in stillness, and that reflection was as vital as repetition or physical practice. Demos traced familiar letters slowly, recalling the shapes and sounds, then progressed to simple words describing everyday objects and actions. Each word was connected in his mind to concrete examples from the day: a loaf of bread, a pebble counted, a branch observed. The act of tracing reinforced both memory and motor skills, while mental associations ensured that abstract symbols were rooted in lived experience. The pedagogue encouraged attention to detail, patience, and deliberate effort, ensuring that each letter and word was formed carefully and thoughtfully. Numbers and arithmetic exercises were integrated into this reflective period. Demos visualized pebbles and clay tokens, arranging them mentally to solve problems of addition, subtraction, and early multiplication. Fractions and simple divisions were considered through imagining portions of food or grains. The pedagogue prompted him to recall earlier solutions, compare them, and check for consistency. This mental rehearsal strengthened not only computational skills but also logical reasoning, foresight, and the ability to detect patterns. Numbers, once abstract, became a language through which Demos interpreted and organized his experiences. Geometry and spatial reasoning also found a place in the quiet night. Demos imagined the courtyard, the angles of shadows, and the proportions of objects he had observed during the day. He mentally traced lines, compared shapes, and noted symmetry and balance, reinforcing spatial awareness and analytical thinking. These exercises demonstrated that mathematics was more than calculation, it was a way to perceive order, harmony, and proportion in the world. The pedagogue reminded him that even small observations could illuminate larger principles, and that careful attention nurtured both intellect and character. Storytelling and moral reflection concluded the structured exercises. Demos recalled fables and myths, mentally retelling them and identifying key virtues: honesty, courage, diligence, and respect. He visualized heroes, ordinary citizens, and natural scenes, connecting narrative content to practical lessons and personal experiences. Repetition and reflection strengthened memory, comprehension, and ethical understanding. Stories became living tools for learning, linking literacy, observation, and moral reasoning in a unified whole. Physical movement, though minimal at this hour, remained part of the routine. Demos stretched gently, balanced lightly, and noticed the subtle sensations of his body in space. Counting breaths, observing posture, and measuring small movements reinforced concentration and mindfulness. Even in quiet activity, the interplay between mind and body was evident, demonstrating the Greek ideal that intellectual and physical training were inseparable. Observation remained an ongoing exercise. Demos noticed the flicker of the lamp, the soft shadows cast across the walls, and the faint night sounds from the city. Each perception was a lesson in awareness, connecting sensory input to memory, reasoning, and reflection. The pedagogue emphasized that learning extended beyond formal exercises, it was embedded in attentiveness to the world, in noticing patterns, and in reflecting on experiences. As the final moments before sleep approached, Demos mentally reviewed the day's lessons. Letters, numbers, shapes, and stories were recalled in sequence, reinforcing connections between concepts. He reflected on the moral lessons embedded in each story, the practical applications of arithmetic, and the patterns observed in nature and daily life. This period of introspection consolidated knowledge, reinforced character, and prepared the mind for rest. Finally, Demos smoothed his wax tablet, set aside his stylus, and lay on his straw mattress. The oil lamp's glow softened, shadows lengthened, and the courtyard became still. The day, filled with observation, repetition, reflection, and integrated learning, had built a strong foundation of knowledge and character. As Demos drifted into sleep, letters, numbers, shapes, and moral stories lingered in his mind, blending with dreams and gently preparing him for another day of discovery, attention, and growth. Dawn broke once again over the terracotta rooftops, casting a soft golden light across the courtyard. The city was quiet, save for distant sounds of merchants preparing for the day and the occasional call of a bird. Demos rose from his straw mattress, stretching lightly to awaken both body and mind. Each new day began with reflection on the previous one, letters traced, numbers calculated, shapes measured, and stories remembered. The pedagogue encouraged this mindful awakening, helping the boy mentally review the lessons already absorbed, ensuring that memory and comprehension remained fresh. Breakfast was simple yet purposeful: barley bread, figs, and a small serving of cheese. As Demos ate, he counted pieces, observed their shapes and textures, and divided portions carefully. Even these mundane tasks were infused with learning, reinforcing arithmetic, observation, and attention to detail. In ancient Greek pedagogy, daily routines were integral to education, turning the ordinary into opportunities for reflection, calculation, and awareness. Every movement, every bite, and every observation was part of the holistic rhythm of learning. Following breakfast, the pedagogue guided Demos through tactile exercises using pebbles, seeds, and small clay tokens. These objects served to reinforce counting, grouping, and pattern recognition. Demos sorted pebbles by size and color, counted seeds in repetitive sequences, and arranged tokens to represent numerical problems or simple transactions. These exercises connected abstract concepts to tangible experience, allowing him to see numbers and patterns as living, practical tools rather than mere symbols. Observation and careful manipulation nurtured focus, reasoning, and precision. Geometry lessons began as Demos observed the courtyard and natural surroundings. Shadows cast by the olive trees and columns offered opportunities to measure angles, trace shapes in the sand, and compare proportions. He noted symmetry in leaves, irregularity in stones, and balance in human-made objects, gradually understanding the relationships between forms. The pedagogue emphasized that geometry was not only a mathematical discipline but also a way of perceiving the world, connecting intellect with observation and aesthetic appreciation. Mid-morning lessons focused on literacy and storytelling. Demos traced letters on the wax tablet, forming words and short sentences. Each word described an aspect of daily life or a moral lesson, linking reading and writing to tangible experience. The pedagogue narrated fables and myths, and Demos repeated them aloud while mentally visualizing scenes, characters, and ethical dilemmas. Repetition strengthened memory and articulation, while reflection on the stories reinforced moral understanding. Literacy became a living skill, deeply intertwined with observation, reasoning, and cultural knowledge. Arithmetic exercises progressed naturally alongside literacy. Demos imagined real-life scenarios, sharing portions of food, calculating measures of grain, or arranging clay tokens as if in a marketplace. Addition, subtraction, and early multiplication exercises were embedded in these practical contexts. The pedagogue encouraged independent reasoning, prompting Demos to anticipate results, check calculations, and reflect on solutions. Numbers became a language through which he interpreted the world, bridging abstract concepts and everyday life. Physical activity punctuated the morning, maintaining a balance between mind and body. Demos ran lightly across the courtyard, stretched, and practiced balancing along low walls. Counting steps, measuring distances, and observing patterns in movement reinforced attention and coordination. Even in play, intellectual skills were subtly reinforced, reflecting the Greek belief in integrated education. Movement was not merely for health, it trained focus, discipline, and an understanding of spatial relationships. By late morning, Demos combined multiple skills in integrated exercises. He traced words while counting tokens, measured shapes while recalling fables, and observed patterns in nature while calculating simple problems. Each task demanded attention, coordination, and thoughtful reflection, demonstrating the holistic philosophy of Greek education. Knowledge was not compartmentalized, letters, numbers, shapes, stories, and moral lessons were woven into a continuous, immersive experience. By mid-morning, the courtyard was alive with the soft bustle of the city beyond its walls. Demos, fully engaged in his learning, moved seamlessly between exercises in literacy, numeracy, and observation. The pedagogue introduced more complex tasks, requiring the boy to integrate multiple skills at once. He traced sentences on his wax tablet while simultaneously counting pebbles arranged in patterns, connecting language with arithmetic and reinforcing memory. Each repetition strengthened comprehension, hand-eye coordination, and the ability to maintain focus over extended periods. Arithmetic exercises now involved practical scenarios. Demos imagined a small market transaction, using clay tokens to represent coins and portions of goods. He calculated totals, subtracted expenses, and divided items fairly among imaginary participants. These problems were designed to strengthen reasoning, anticipate outcomes, and recognize numerical patterns in everyday life. The pedagogue encouraged independent thought, prompting Demos to check his work, visualize different solutions, and reflect on fairness and accuracy. Numbers became not just symbols but tools for understanding, organizing, and interacting with the world. Geometry and spatial reasoning exercises were expanded in both scale and complexity. Demos measured the angles of shadows cast by olive trees and columns, traced geometric shapes in sand, and compared their proportions to those found in natural objects. The pedagogue emphasized the relationships between forms, teaching him to perceive balance, symmetry, and proportion in both human-made and natural structures. Each observation was linked to practical or aesthetic understanding, demonstrating that mathematics extended beyond calculation to perception and critical thought. Storytelling remained central to the lessons. The pedagogue narrated short fables, myths, and moral tales, which Demos traced on his tablet and repeated aloud. These narratives illustrated virtues such as honesty, courage, diligence, and respect. By linking stories to concrete examples from his daily life, dividing bread, counting pebbles, observing shadows, Demos integrated moral lessons with literacy and numeracy. Reflection on these tales strengthened comprehension and ethical reasoning, illustrating the holistic nature of education in ancient Greece. Physical activity punctuated the mid-morning sessions, reinforcing the unity of mind and body. Demos ran lightly across the courtyard, stretched, and practiced balancing along low walls. Counting steps, observing distances, and noting patterns in his movements connected physical exercise with numeracy and spatial reasoning. The pedagogue emphasized that attention, coordination, and concentration developed together through both intellectual and physical practice. These exercises also refreshed the mind, preventing fatigue and sustaining focus. Observation remained a continuous exercise. Demos noted the subtle movement of leaves, the changing light, and the textures of stones and walls. Each sensory impression was linked to earlier lessons, patterns in shadows connected to geometry, the number of leaves to counting, and textures to descriptive words. This integration of perception, reflection, and practice strengthened attentiveness, memory, and understanding, illustrating that learning extended beyond structured exercises into every aspect of daily life. By late morning, Demos engaged in integrated tasks combining multiple skills. He traced short sentences, counted tokens, measured shapes, and reflected on moral stories simultaneously. These exercises reinforced the connections between letters, numbers, shapes, and ethical lessons. Each task required careful observation, concentration, and thoughtful reasoning, illustrating the holistic approach of Greek pedagogy. Knowledge was cumulative and interconnected, and the boy's growing understanding reflected the seamless integration of literacy, numeracy, geometry, observation, and moral development. The mid-morning period concluded with a pause for reflection. Demos sat quietly in the courtyard, reviewing letters, numbers, and shapes mentally, recalling stories, and contemplating the ethical lessons embedded in them. The pedagogue encouraged him to notice patterns, make connections, and anticipate applications of what he had learned. These moments of introspection strengthened comprehension, memory, and the ability to reason independently. Learning was not merely repetition, it was thoughtful engagement, reflection, and integration of knowledge with experience. As the sun reached its highest point in the sky, signaling the approach of midday, Demos paused for a simple meal. Bread, figs, and a small portion of cheese were laid before him, each item offering not only sustenance but also an opportunity for subtle learning. The pedagogue encouraged Demos to count pieces, compare sizes, and divide portions carefully. Even these ordinary actions reinforced numeracy, observation, and precision. The boy's mind, accustomed to finding lessons in every activity, linked these physical experiences with earlier exercises in counting, measuring, and proportion. After the brief meal, the day's lessons resumed, emphasizing practical applications of earlier skills. Demos arranged pebbles, seeds, and small clay tokens to simulate marketplace transactions. He calculated totals, considered proportions, and practiced fair division. These exercises developed both arithmetic skill and reasoning. The pedagogue prompted him to visualize each step before acting, encouraging independent thought, anticipation of results, and verification of outcomes. Through this process, numbers became more than symbols, they were tools for interpreting and organizing the world. Geometry exercises continued alongside arithmetic, often blending seamlessly with observation of the environment. Demos traced shapes in the sand, measured angles of shadows cast by olive trees, and compared sizes of stones and other natural objects. These tasks reinforced spatial reasoning, attention to detail, and an appreciation for proportion and symmetry. The pedagogue emphasized that geometry was not confined to abstract diagrams but was observable in the natural and human-made world, linking mathematical understanding with aesthetic and practical awareness. Literacy exercises progressed with integrated storytelling and writing. Demos traced sentences on his wax tablet, connecting words to concrete objects, actions, and ethical lessons from the day. The pedagogue narrated fables and myths, which Demos repeated aloud and visualized in detail. Stories illustrated virtues such as courage, diligence, honesty, and respect. Repetition and visualization strengthened memory, comprehension, and moral reflection. Literacy was thus tied not only to letters and words but also to observation, reasoning, and ethical understanding. Physical activity punctuated the midday lessons, sustaining the connection between body and mind. Demos ran lightly across the courtyard, stretched, and practiced balancing on low walls. Counting steps, noting distances, and observing patterns of movement reinforced numeracy, spatial awareness, and concentration. These activities also refreshed mental focus, demonstrating the Greek ideal that intellectual and physical training were complementary, cultivating both discipline and agility. Observation remained central throughout the midday exercises. Demos noted variations in sunlight, subtle movements of leaves, and textures of stones and surfaces. Each observation was linked to earlier lessons in letters, numbers, and geometry. For example, the length of a shadow became a measurement exercise, the number of seeds a counting problem, and the shape of a stone a geometric comparison. This constant connection between perception and learning cultivated attentiveness, memory, and the ability to see patterns in the surrounding world. By early afternoon, Demos engaged in integrated tasks combining multiple disciplines. He traced sentences while counting tokens, measured shapes while recalling stories, and mentally reflected on ethical lessons simultaneously. Each task demanded focus, coordination, and thoughtful reasoning. This holistic approach exemplified the Greek philosophy of education. Learning was cumulative, interconnected, and embedded in both intellectual and physical activity. Letters, numbers, shapes, stories, and moral reflection were woven into a seamless daily rhythm, preparing Demos for both practical life and higher reasoning. As the sun moved westward, the pedagogue guided the boy toward quiet reflection. Demos mentally reviewed the lessons of the morning and midday, letters traced, numbers calculated, shapes measured, and stories recalled. Reflection reinforced memory, comprehension, and reasoning. It also fostered ethical awareness, as the boy considered how lessons of fairness, diligence, and respect applied in everyday life. Even in stillness, learning continued, blending repetition, observation, and thoughtful reflection into a continuous cycle. The afternoon sun cast a warm glow over the courtyard as Demos returned to his lessons, entering a period of deeper, more integrated learning. The pedagogue introduced exercises that combined literacy, numeracy, geometry, and observation simultaneously, challenging the boy to coordinate multiple skills. Demos traced sentences on his wax tablet while arranging clay tokens in sequences that represented numerical problems, connecting words with numbers and reinforcing both memory and understanding. Each action required concentration, precision, and thoughtful engagement, weaving intellectual and practical skills together. Arithmetic exercises grew increasingly sophisticated. Demos visualized marketplace scenarios, imagining sales and exchanges, and calculated totals, change, and fair divisions using tokens. He combined addition, subtraction, and simple multiplication to solve problems, often anticipating outcomes before acting. The pedagogue encouraged reflection on each calculation, emphasizing logical reasoning and verification. Mistakes were approached as opportunities for learning, reinforcing the process of careful observation, analysis, and independent thought. Numbers became not just symbols but practical tools for interpreting, organizing, and engaging with the world. Geometry and spatial reasoning exercises remained central to the afternoon lessons. Demos measured angles of shadows, compared proportions of stones and natural objects, and traced shapes in sand. The pedagogue highlighted patterns of symmetry, balance, and irregularity, encouraging the boy to see geometry as a lens through which to understand the natural and human-made environment. Each observation strengthened spatial awareness, critical thinking, and appreciation for order and proportion, reinforcing the idea that mathematics was both practical and aesthetic. Storytelling and moral reflection were interwoven with these exercises. Demos traced words and sentences while recalling fables, myths, and moral anecdotes. Each story illustrated virtues such as honesty, diligence, courage, and respect, linking ethical lessons to concrete actions and observations. Repetition, tracing, and visualization reinforced comprehension and memory, while reflection on moral content cultivated character and judgment. Stories were not mere entertainment, they provided frameworks for understanding human behavior, social interaction, and personal responsibility. Physical activity punctuated the integrated exercises. Demos ran lightly across the courtyard, stretched, and practiced balance on low walls. He counted steps, observed distances, and noted patterns in movement, connecting numeracy and spatial awareness with physical coordination. These exercises refreshed the mind, reinforced concentration, and strengthened the connection between intellect and body. The pedagogue emphasized that physical and intellectual training were complementary, cultivating holistic development in both thought and action. Observation continued as a subtle, ongoing practice. Demos noted the shifting sunlight, movement of leaves, and textures of stones, walls, and natural objects. These observations were linked to earlier exercises in letters, numbers, and geometry, creating an integrated understanding of the environment. For example, the length of a shadow became a geometry problem, the number of leaves a counting exercise, and the shape of a stone a comparison for symmetry. This attentiveness trained both perception and analytical thought, demonstrating that learning was embedded in every moment of awareness. By late afternoon, Demos engaged in highly integrated tasks that combined multiple disciplines. He traced sentences, arranged tokens, measured shapes, and reflected on moral stories all at once. Each task demanded coordination, concentration, and thoughtful reasoning. This holistic approach exemplified Greek pedagogy, showing that knowledge was cumulative and interconnected. Letters, numbers, shapes, stories, and ethical reflection were woven into a continuous rhythm, preparing the boy for practical life, higher reasoning, and moral understanding. As the afternoon waned, the pedagogue guided Demos into a period of reflection. He reviewed letters, numbers, geometric forms, and moral lessons mentally, consolidating learning from the morning and midday sessions. Thoughtful recollection reinforced comprehension, strengthened memory, and deepened ethical understanding. Even in stillness, Demos engaged in active learning, connecting knowledge with experience, observation, and reflection in a continuous cycle that would carry into the evening lessons. As the sun began to tilt toward the west, casting long, warm shadows across the courtyard, Demos entered the final phase of the day's structured learning. The pedagogue guided him through exercises that reinforced and integrated all the skills practiced since morning: letters, numbers, shapes, observation, and moral reflection. Demos traced sentences on his wax tablet while counting clay tokens, linking literacy and numeracy seamlessly. Each repetition strengthened comprehension, coordination, and memory, ensuring that the day's lessons were deeply embedded. Arithmetic exercises now included more complex scenarios. Demos imagined small-scale market exchanges, calculating totals, determining fair shares, and mentally tracking sequences of transactions. Simple multiplication and division exercises were incorporated into these tasks, connecting numbers to practical situations. The pedagogue encouraged reflection at every step. Demos verified results, compared outcomes, and considered alternative methods. Through this integration, numerical concepts became living tools for reasoning, fairness, and organization in daily life. Geometry and spatial reasoning exercises complemented these tasks. Demos measured angles of shadows cast by the late afternoon sun, traced geometric patterns in the sand, and compared natural forms such as stones, leaves, and architectural elements. Symmetry, balance, and proportion were emphasized, linking observation with analytical reasoning and aesthetic appreciation. The pedagogue highlighted that geometry was not merely abstract but observable in the environment, reinforcing the connection between intellect, perception, and practical understanding. Storytelling and moral reflection continued alongside these exercises. Demos recited short fables and myths while tracing key words on his wax tablet. Each story illustrated ethical virtues, honesty, courage, diligence, and respect, and the boy reflected on their applications to daily life. By connecting narrative content with practical exercises and observations, Demos integrated literacy, numeracy, and ethical reasoning into a cohesive understanding. Repetition and visualization strengthened memory, comprehension, and character simultaneously. Physical activity punctuated the late afternoon, maintaining the unity of mind and body. Demos ran lightly across the courtyard, stretched, and practiced balancing along low walls. Counting steps, noting distances, and observing movement patterns linked physical coordination with numeracy and spatial awareness. The pedagogue emphasized that intellectual and physical training were inseparable, cultivating both mental discipline and bodily control. Even brief moments of movement served to refresh focus and reinforce lessons learned throughout the day. Observation remained a constant undercurrent of learning. Demos noted the changing light, subtle movement of leaves, textures of stones, and sounds drifting from the city. Each observation reinforced previous exercises, shadow lengths for geometry, pebble counts for arithmetic, and shapes for spatial reasoning. This attentiveness nurtured analytical thinking, memory, and awareness, demonstrating that education extended beyond formal exercises into all aspects of daily life. As evening approached, Demos engaged in reflective exercises designed to consolidate learning. He mentally reviewed letters, words, numbers, and geometric patterns, recalling moral lessons and practical applications. This introspection reinforced memory, comprehension, and ethical understanding, preparing the mind for quiet reflection and the transition to evening routines. The pedagogue encouraged thoughtful rehearsal, emphasizing that learning continued even in stillness and that reflection was essential to internalize knowledge and cultivate character. Finally, the courtyard settled into a calm hush. Demos smoothed his wax tablet, set aside tokens and pebbles, and paused to observe the subtle glow of the sunset. The day's cycle, morning exercises, integrated mid-morning tasks, midday reflection, afternoon challenges, and late afternoon consolidation, had formed a continuous, immersive rhythm of learning. Letters, numbers, shapes, stories, and ethical lessons were now intertwined in memory and understanding, ready to be carried into the evening's quiet reflection and eventual rest. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, the courtyard was bathed in the soft, golden hues of evening. The heat of the day had faded, leaving a calm, serene atmosphere. Demos prepared for the final lessons, a period of reflection and quiet integration designed to consolidate the knowledge and skills gained throughout the day. The pedagogue guided him gently, emphasizing that learning extended beyond action, that memory, comprehension, and character development continued even in stillness. Demos traced letters on his wax tablet one last time, recalling the shapes and sounds of each character. He moved on to short words and sentences describing simple, everyday activities and ethical lessons. Each tracing exercise was deliberate, reinforcing motor skills, memory, and comprehension. The boy's mind linked each word to tangible objects, actions, and experiences from the day, a loaf of bread, pebbles counted during arithmetic exercises, or shadows observed during geometry lessons. By connecting abstract symbols to lived experience, Demos internalized the lessons deeply and meaningfully. Arithmetic exercises at this hour were contemplative. Demos visualized tokens, imagined small exchanges of goods, and solved simple problems of addition, subtraction, and division. Fractions and proportions were considered through imagined divisions of food or objects. The pedagogue encouraged him to anticipate outcomes, reflect on his reasoning, and mentally verify results. Mistakes were addressed thoughtfully, fostering independent thought and problem-solving skills. Numbers became tools not just for calculation but for understanding fairness, organization, and the logic of daily life. Geometry exercises continued with a subtle, reflective tone. Demos observed the fading light, measured the angles of elongated shadows, and traced geometric patterns in the sand. He compared natural forms, stones, leaves, and branches, and noted balance, symmetry, and proportion. The pedagogue emphasized that these exercises cultivated both observation and analytical thinking, allowing Demos to perceive order and harmony in the world around him. Geometry was not abstract, it was a lens through which to understand both nature and human craftsmanship. Storytelling and moral reflection concluded the structured part of the evening. Demos recalled fables, myths, and short anecdotes while tracing key words on the wax tablet. Each story illustrated virtues such as honesty, diligence, courage, and respect. He reflected on how these lessons applied to his own actions and observations during the day. Repetition and mental visualization reinforced comprehension and ethical awareness, ensuring that the stories were not merely remembered but internalized. Literacy, moral reflection, and observation were thus woven into a single, cohesive practice. Physical movement was gentle but purposeful. Demos stretched slowly, balanced lightly, and moved with care around the courtyard. Counting steps, noting distances, and observing movement patterns linked bodily awareness with numeracy and spatial reasoning. The pedagogue emphasized that this final physical exercise reinforced concentration, coordination, and mindfulness, demonstrating the inseparability of body and mind in Greek pedagogy. Even subtle movement nurtured both intellectual and physical development. Observation remained continuous. Demos noted the flickering of the oil lamp, the gentle sway of leaves in the evening breeze, and distant city sounds. Each sensory impression connected to previous lessons. Shadow lengths reminded him of geometry, objects counted earlier reinforced numeracy, and observed shapes informed spatial reasoning. The boy's attentiveness cultivated analytical thinking, memory, and the habit of seeing the world as a living classroom. Finally, Demos prepared to transition from structured learning to quiet reflection. He smoothed his wax tablet, set aside tokens and tools, and settled on his straw mattress. The pedagogue encouraged mental rehearsal, letters traced, numbers calculated, geometric forms visualized, and stories recalled with attention to moral meaning. This period of introspection consolidated learning, reinforced comprehension, and nurtured character. As Demos drifted toward sleep, the lessons of the day lingered, blending with dreams, and quietly preparing him for another day of discovery, observation, and growth. Before dawn, the courtyard was enveloped in a soft, tranquil silence. The first faint rays of light hinted at the awakening city beyond the walls. Demos rose quietly from his straw mattress, stretching gently to awaken both body and mind. Each morning began with reflection on the previous day's lessons, letters traced, numbers calculated, geometric shapes observed, and stories remembered. The pedagogue encouraged this mindful start, guiding the boy to mentally rehearse skills while observing the quiet changes in the environment. This early reflection reinforced memory and prepared the mind for the new day's learning. Breakfast was modest: barley bread, a few figs, and a small portion of cheese. Even during these ordinary acts, Demos practiced counting in proportion. He divided pieces evenly, observed shapes and textures, and considered the number of seeds in each figure. These simple exercises reinforced numeracy, attention to detail, and careful observation. The pedagogue emphasized that in Greek education, every task, no matter how mundane, was an opportunity to practice skills, connect concepts, and observe patterns. After breakfast, Demos engaged in tactile exercises using pebbles, seeds, and clay tokens. These objects were sorted, counted, and arranged to reinforce both numerical understanding and pattern recognition. He grouped pebbles by size and color, counted seeds in sequences, and created simple problems using tokens to represent transactions or measurements. The pedagogue encouraged independent thinking, prompting Demos to anticipate outcomes, verify solutions, and recognize patterns. Each action connected abstract concepts to tangible experience, making numbers and sequences meaningful tools for reasoning and understanding. Geometry exercises began with careful observation of the courtyard and natural surroundings. Demos noted angles of sunlight, lengths of shadows, and symmetry in leaves and stones. Using strings and sticks, he traced geometric shapes in the sand, compared proportions, and practiced measuring distances. The pedagogue emphasized that these exercises taught both practical skill and perceptual awareness. Geometry was not only an abstract discipline but also a way to understand order, balance, and proportion in the environment. Observation, measurement, and reflection worked together to cultivate analytical thinking. Mid-morning lessons focused on literacy and storytelling. Demos traced letters on his wax tablet, forming words and short sentences that described daily activities or conveyed moral lessons. The pedagogue narrated brief fables and myths, which the boy repeated aloud while visualizing scenes and ethical dilemmas. Repetition strengthened memory and articulation, while reflection on the stories reinforced moral understanding. Literacy became a living skill, intimately connected to observation, reasoning, and ethical awareness. Words, once abstract, were anchored in tangible actions and experiences, enhancing comprehension and integration. Arithmetic exercises continued alongside literacy. Demos imagined scenarios such as distributing food, exchanging goods, or calculating portions of grain. He applied addition, subtraction, and early multiplication to solve these practical problems. The pedagogue encouraged reasoning through each step, verifying results, and considering alternative solutions. Numbers became not only tools for calculation but also a language for understanding fairness, organization, and patterns in daily life. The integration of mental calculation with physical representation reinforced both comprehension and memory. Physical activity punctuated the morning, maintaining a balance between mind and body. Demos ran lightly, stretched, and practiced balancing along low walls. Counting steps, observing distances, and noting patterns of movement connected numeracy and spatial reasoning with bodily coordination. These exercises refreshed attention, strengthened focus, and demonstrated the Greek ideal that intellectual and physical training were inseparable. Movement was a tool for both concentration and awareness, reinforcing skills learned in earlier exercises. By late morning, Demos engaged in integrated tasks that combined multiple skills. He traced sentences while counting tokens, measured shapes while recalling stories, and reflected on moral lessons simultaneously. Each task demanded careful attention, coordination, and thoughtful reasoning. This holistic approach exemplified Greek pedagogy, where letters, numbers, shapes, stories, and ethical reflection were interwoven into a seamless cycle of learning. Knowledge was cumulative, interconnected, and applied to both intellectual and practical life, ensuring that the boy developed a comprehensive understanding of the world around him. By mid-morning, the courtyard had warmed under the gentle sun, and the city beyond began to stir with the sounds of daily life. Demos, refreshed from the morning's reflection and exercises, engaged in more complex integrated lessons. The pedagogue guided him through tasks combining literacy, numeracy, geometry, and observation, requiring coordination, concentration, and thoughtful reasoning. Demos traced sentences on his wax tablet while arranging clay tokens in sequences representing numerical problems, merging language, arithmetic, and practical reasoning into a cohesive exercise. Each repetition reinforced memory, motor skills, and understanding. Arithmetic exercises became increasingly applied and intricate. Demos imagined marketplace scenarios, calculating totals for exchanged goods, distributing portions fairly, and mentally verifying solutions. Problems included sequences of addition, subtraction, and early multiplication, challenging him to anticipate outcomes, check results, and reason independently. The pedagogue emphasized that numbers were more than abstract symbols, they were practical tools for fairness, organization, and understanding the world. Mistakes were treated as opportunities for reflection and learning, strengthening analytical skills and problem-solving. Geometry and spatial reasoning exercises were expanded in complexity. Demos measured angles of shadows cast by olive trees and columns, traced geometric shapes in the sand, and compared natural and man-made forms. Symmetry, proportion, and balance were emphasized, encouraging the boy to see relationships between objects in the environment. Observation reinforced analytical thinking, while careful measurement strengthened attention to detail. Geometry was presented not only as a mathematical discipline but also as a lens for understanding the natural and human-made world. Storytelling remained integral to learning. The pedagogue narrated brief myths and fables, and demos traced key words while visualizing the stories in his mind. Each narrative conveyed moral lessons, honesty, diligence, courage, and respect, which he connected to his daily observations and actions. Repetition reinforced memory, comprehension, and ethical awareness, while linking literacy with practical and moral reasoning. Stories became living tools for understanding human behavior and integrating moral reflection with intellectual skill. Physical activity continued to support mental focus. Demos ran lightly across the courtyard, stretched, and practiced balance on low walls. Counting steps, observing distances, and noting movement patterns integrated numeracy and spatial awareness with bodily coordination. The pedagogue emphasized the complementarity of physical and intellectual exercise. Movement refreshed attention, strengthened focus, and reinforced skills developed during cognitive tasks. Even playful or subtle activity carried lessons in discipline, coordination, and observation. Observation was woven seamlessly into every activity. Demos noticed subtle variations in sunlight, the movement of leaves, textures of stones, and distant city sounds. Each sensory detail reinforced lessons from earlier exercises: shadow lengths for geometry, pebble counts for arithmetic, and shapes for spatial reasoning. Attentiveness cultivated analytical thinking, memory, and awareness, demonstrating that learning extended beyond formal exercises into continuous interaction with the environment. By late morning, demos engaged in integrated tasks that combined multiple disciplines simultaneously. He traced sentences while counting tokens, measured shapes while recalling fables, and mentally reflected on ethical lessons, linking intellectual, practical, and moral learning. Each exercise demanded careful coordination, focus, and thought. This holistic approach reflected the Greek pedagogy's emphasis on cumulative, interconnected knowledge. Letters, numbers, geometric forms, stories, and ethical reflection were woven into a continuous rhythm, preparing demos for practical life, reasoned judgment, and moral understanding. As the sun reached its zenith, the pedagogue guided demos into a brief period of reflection and consolidation. The boy mentally reviewed letters, words, numbers, shapes, and moral stories from the morning and mid-morning exercises. Thoughtful rehearsal strengthened memory, reinforced comprehension, and encouraged independent reasoning. Even in stillness, learning continued, integrating intellectual, practical, and ethical dimensions into a single, immersive experience that would carry seamlessly into midday and afternoon lessons. As the sun climbed toward its highest point, signaling midday, demos paused for a simple meal. Bread, figs, and a small portion of cheese were set before him. Even this ordinary act was infused with learning. He counted pieces, observed shapes and textures, and divided portions carefully. These seemingly mundane actions reinforced numeracy, attention to detail, and careful observation. In ancient Greek pedagogy, every routine task was an opportunity to practice skills, connect concepts, and notice patterns in the world around him. Following the meal, demos returned to exercises with renewed focus. He worked with clay tokens, pebbles, and seeds, arranging them to solve practical problems in counting, grouping, and sequencing. The pedagogue encouraged him to anticipate outcomes, check solutions, and recognize patterns. These tactile exercises made abstract concepts tangible, strengthening reasoning, memory, and the ability to apply knowledge to real-life situations. Numbers and sequences became living tools for understanding the world. Geometry exercises continued